So we'll start from there. Okay, we'll start. Kum lena blat gemara, Abudvach, Motzei Shabbos, Parshas Vayetze. And we're going to finish today the Masechta Rosh Hashana. So the Mishnah said, if someone Misha Beidach, if somebody made Daven Musaf, and you made Malchia Zechreines and Shefers, and the Achikach, we're on page Lamed Daled on the base. If somebody can tell, what do you call it?
It is 34b2.
34b2. Okay.
Middle of the page.
Okay.
Second paragraph.
So Misha Beidach, but Achikach is Manuel Shefer. She daven Musaf, and then you got a Shefer. Take a minute to go through the motion to Kiyah, true at Kiyah. Says the Gemara, time, but the reason is the Lohavile Shefer Mi'ikara. He didn't have a Shefer from the outset. So therefore, you daven Musaf without the Shefer. But a Lohavile Shefer Mi'ikara, if you actually did have a Shefer from the outset, Kishamaluhu, when should you hear the sounds of the Shefer? Asay the brachas, in Musaf, in the order of the bracha. That's ideal. And that is why the number of Shema hold that even today when we blow the Shefer Kiyas the Meyushiv by Kriyas HaTorah, the main Kiyas are actually the Musaf ones. It says right here, you should do it by Musaf. Shamalu Rapapa Bashmul, heard come, let's leave. Sorry. Shamalu, you have to hear that. Rapapa Bashmul come, stood up to daven. Amalish Mai said this Gabai Kinahinalach. When you recognize that I'm up to the, I finished the brachas, tuckily blow for me. Which sounds like he's blowing by the silent Shemon Esrei. Otherwise, if you Musaf, the repetition, then why wouldn't you know when it's time to blow? Amalei Rabba says Rabba, here, only if you're with a minion, not if you're an individual. So the two of the time I'm going to the Brisa explain in a minute, because you're Shaiman, when you hear the Kiyas, Shaiman al Haseder, al Seder brachas. You have to follow the prescribed order, and you have to follow the brachas, malchus, and shefers. Ahmed, remember that said b'chavri when we're talking about a minion. But it's not a minion. Shayman al seder, you have to hear them in the correct order. Of the shalay al seder bracha, you don't do it by musaf. So there's two ways of learning pshat in Gemara. Either the pshat in Gemara is if you're davening with a minion, even the silent Shemon Esrei, you have to blow shofar. But if you're davening yachid on your own in your own house, you don't blow shofar during Musaf. But the other way of learning is even.
That's right. The speech is right, but can't get the picture.
Even if you're davening in the.
That's it. Thank you.
And even if you're davening in the. Even if you're davening in Musaf, if you're davening the silent Shemon, each individual davening, you don't blow shofar, and if you're the repetition, you do. And the argument here is basically when we're davening on our own, when we daven in a minyan, and everyone davens the silent Shemon on their own, is that considered davening in a minyan, or that's considered just a collective group of individuals davening? If we consider that as part of the minyan, then of course you blow shofar in the silent Shemon. If we don't treat that as a minyan, but rather we say that the minyan is only the repetition, and even if you're davening in shul, the silent Shemon, you don't blow shofar. Now you'll notice here we use the word brachas all the time when we're talking about davening musaf. So the Baal HaMaor says that this is the bracha. Whenever we make a bracha on shofar, this is the bracha. The idea of making a bracha lishmoya kol shofar is not really. It was only devised many years later, not in the times of the Gemara. Okay. Says the Gemara further. The Yachid Shaloi Taka Chaverei, if you're an individual, and Shaloi Taka, Yachid Shaloi Taka, an individual who didn't blow shofar, Chaverei Takela, then your friend steps up to the plate and can blow for you. Which sounds like every individual had to blow, the mitzvah is to blow the shofar. If the mitzvah is to blow the shofar, then every Jew has a mitzvah to blow. And then if we don't do it ourselves, someone else does it for us. But if you learn the mitzvah is to listen to the shofar, then what does the Gemara mean exactly? If a person didn't blow, his friend can blow for him. I mean, the only alternative is to learn that even though the mitzvah is to listen to the shofar, you should hear it from somebody who hasn't blown yet. But if the person who's there to blow would blow for themselves, they can still blow it again for you to have your mind. The Yachid Shalei
Oh,
Beirach,
no
but if you
sofa.
daven Musaf, ain't Chaveira Mevorach Lav. The other person cannot daven Musaf and have your mind. Mitzvah betaykin yesem mevorachim. It's more important to blow than to actually daven Musaf. Kate said, what do you mean? For example, they are two cities. Bachas taykin bachas mevorachim. One city they have a shofar, the other city they have a bracha. In other words, they have a chazan in one city that is going to daven. They didn't have machzerim. We knew the whole davening, but they didn't have a shofar. The other area had a shofar, but they didn't have anyone who knew how to daven. So what's more important, the davening or the shofar? You go to the region where they have the shofar. You don't go to the place where you make the bracha, where you daven, because shofar is more important. So, obviously, pshita, hada araisa, hada rabbanim. Davening is only from the rabbis. Shofar is from the Torah. Now, the Gemara could have answered very simply that we're talking about the second day Rosh Hashana, and then blowing shofar is also only from the rabbis. The Gemara doesn't say that because in rabbis itself, there are different levels. And because the shofar second day is taking the mitzvah of the Torah and extending it for another day, that's a higher level of Rabbana than davening, which is completely devised by the Rabbana. We need it. The afagav, the havade vasafik. We're talking about in the case, the Gemara gives a different answer. We're talking about a case where in the city with the shofar is, you're not sure there's a shofar. It's a suffix, it's a doubt. But in the other city, there's davening. Definitely there's a chazan who knows the whole davening, will say it by heart. So the question is, a vade de Rabbana, definite de Rabbana, versus a suffix, a doubt of the Torah, which is more important. And the Gemara and the Chiddush is that you should go to the suffix, even though you're not even sure you'll do anything. But because it's a suffix, it's a possibility you'll fulfill a mitzvah in the Torah, that supersedes definite de Rabbana. And based on this Gemara, they ask a question on the famous Rambam. The Rambam holds, we know that every time there's a doubt in the Torah, you can't remember, did you do this mitzvah from the Torah? Did you bench it? Didn't you bench after bread? You have to bench again. If you don't remember if you did a mitzvah in the Torah, you have to repeat it. So a suffix from the Torah, we're always stringent. Who told us to be stringent? The Rashba said, the Torah said, this is what you have to do. But the Rambam said, it's the rabbis who said that if there's a suffix of the Torah, be stringent. So what's the Gemara here? So you have two rabbis. You have a suffix if there's a shofar. The rabbi said, listen, you should hear the shofar. And the rabbi said, daven. So why is one more important than the other? They're both on the rabbinical level. So again, we're going to have to say, according to the Rambam, that a suffix in the Torah, even though it's rabbinical, still carries more weight than something which was totally devised by the rabbi. Okay, continue. Says the Gemara, the Mishnah says, you have an argument, Rav Gamliel and the Chachamim. The Rabbi Gamliel said that the Chazan is there, he's the one who davens on behalf of everybody. And the Rabbanan said, no, every individual has to daven for themselves. So now we're going to bring a discussion between Rabbi Gamliel and the Rabbi. It goes as follows. Tani, we learn, they said to Rabbi Gamliel, the Dvarech according to you. You say that the Chazan, the Baal Tefillah, is the one who davens and has everyone in mind. So tell me, Lama Tzibah Mispalin. So why do individuals daven the silent Shemad Esrei? For what purpose? He said, you're right, you don't have to. You know why we do it? Today, in order the Chazan should have time to prepare a tefillah, and we don't want everyone else to twiddle their thumbs, so everyone therefore davens the silent Shemad Esrei. But the main Shemad Esrei is the Chazan's. I'll ask you a question to you. According to you, that what every individual has to daven, so why have a chazan at all? Why have repetition of Shemana Esrei if everyone already said Shemana Esrei as well? They said to him, you know why? It's only for those who don't know how to daven. That's what the Baal Tefillah is for. But all those who know how to daven must daven themselves. So then he responded, okay, so you can see that there's a need for a Baal Tefillah to daven, and the Tefillah that he says carries weight and has certain people in mind. Once the Tefillah carries weight, and once you have certain people in mind, you might well have everybody in mind. And the reason he says is the Baal Tefillah. In other words, the argument is as follows, as the Baba Rebbe explains very nicely, that the Baal Rabbi Gamliel says you have to channel all your tefillahs through the Baal Tefillah. That's what Rabbi Gamliel says. It should all be channeled through the Baal Tefillah. And the rabbi said, no, every individual should daven for themselves. And the reason, the crux of their argument is that there's certain criteria that has to be met to be a Baal Tefillah. Not only you have to have a nice voice, but you have to be very humble, you have to be a righteous person. You're in a way in a higher level than the average person in the shul, than the lay person. That's what the Baal Tefillah is. So Rabbi Gamliel says quality supersedes quantity. We need to channel all of our tefillahs through this Baal Tefillah. Let it represent all of us. And the Chachamim say, no, every individual quantity is much more important. Even though you're not in the same Ramah, you're not in the same level as the Baal Tefillah, it doesn't matter. And this is consistent with another argument that they had in Gemara Brachas there, in Tfilas HaShachar, when Rabbi Gamliel, while he was the leader of the community, he was very particular in the kind of students that he accepted in the school. He ran an Ivy League school. If you didn't have a certain IQ, if you didn't bring a certain level of midas, you had to be toicha kebara, you had to be perfect. You had to be the consummate student. Otherwise, he wouldn't accept you. When they impeached him and the Rabbi Elazar and Azariah took over, and all the Chachamim, they opened the doors and 400 more benches were added just in the first day. And all these students were invited in. Those Rabbi Elazar and Azariah and the Chachamim believed quantity is more important than quality. And Rabbi Gamliel said, no, quality is more important. And that's what they're arguing in. So now the Gemara continues. Amar Rabbi Bachar Rabbi Yechanan. You should know that Rabbi Yechanan said, Moedim Chachamim le Rabbi Gamliel, that at the end, after this whole argument, the rabbis turned around and they conceded the point to Rabbi Gamliel, said, you're right. The Baal Tefillah is the one who does the davening for everybody. And Rav Amar, and Rav said, the argument still rages on, they still maintain the argument. No, the Rabbanon say every individual has to daven for themselves. Shama Rab Chia Brei, the Rabbi Menachmeni, Rab Chia, the son of Menachmeni, heard this. Rabbi Yechanan said, Ozil, he went, he went and he relayed this over to Rabdimi, the son of Chinina. Amalei, Rabdimi said, you should know that even though Rabbi Yechanan said that the rabbis conceded their point to Rabbi Gamliel, not everyone agrees. Rav said, it's still argument. Amalei, he said to him, you should know that you're not telling me anything new. Rabbi Bar Bachana, the same Rabbi Bar Bachana who said in the name of Rabbi Yechanan, that the Rabbanan conceded to Rabbi Gamliel and said, you're right, the Baal Tefillah is most important, also said at the same time, he said, Ki Amar Rabbi Yechanan said this thing, if Lakish argued. But Amar, he said, Adayin he machlekes. There's still an argument. Says the Gemara. So you're telling me Rabbi Yechanan said the rabbis agreed with Rabbi Gamliel. Is that so? But another student of Rabbi Yechanan by the name of Rabbi Chana from Tzipoira said in there that Hilchos like Rabbi Gamliel, the law is like Rabbi Gamliel, that the Chazan is the one who has everyone in mind. By telling us that the ruling is like Rabbi Gamliel, what you're really saying is that there's still an argument, but I'm telling you that we rule like Rabbi Gamliel. So what do you tell me Rabbi Yechanan said the rabbis conceded to Rabbi Gamliel? Hilchos Miklal Depligi. The fact he tells that's the rule means they're arguing. Says the Gemara, Kisolik Rab Abba, when Rab Abba came from the waters, from the seas, Pirsha, he explained as follows. You're mixing up that he's saying here that there's different times of the year. When do we say Moedim Chacham Rab Gamliel? When do we say that Chacham concede to Rab Gamliel that the Chazan is the main thing? That's what Bracha Rosh Hashana Kippur on Rosh Hashana Kippur. And we'll soon see in the Gemara why that should be any different. The other Rabbi Yechanan, we said the rule is like Rabbi Gamliel, and the Chazan is the main person, was talking about Bracha Chol Hashana. In other words, the rest of the year, the rabbis still maintain everyone has to daven on their own. And Rabbi Gamliel says always the Chazan. So the rabbis agree to Rabbi Gamliel when it comes to Shana Kippur, you're right. But when it comes to the rest of the year, Rabbi Yechanan said the halacha is like Rabbi Gamliel, even though the rabbis are arguing. Says the Gemara, it's incorrect. Any, that is not right. Because the very same Rabbi Chana said in the name of Rabbi Yechanan another thing. Halacha, he was a bit more explicit. Halacha ki Rabbi Gamliel, where? Bebracha shel Rosh Hashana v'shel Yom Kippur. Halacha Rabbi Gamliel when it comes to the bracha Hashana, when it comes to the brachas of Yom Kippur. Allah is always like Rabbi Gamliel. So that means that even Rosh Hashana Yom Kippur, the rabbis are arguing. So what's this other Rabbi Yechanan who said that the rabbis conceded this point? The Rabbi Bachana said the Chacham Amaydi, what's going on? Elam Nachman Yitzchak. Nachman said there's two different Chachamis and mixing things up. There's a Chacham of our Mishnah and there's another Chacham of a Brais or Rab Meir as we'll soon see. The Chacham of our Mishnah argue across the board. No matter Rosh Hashanah, the rest of the year, they believe that every individual davens, you cannot rely on the Chazan. And Rab Gamliel says you always rely on the Chazan. But there's another Chacham, which is actually Rab Meir, and that Rab Meir concedes, agrees, says, you know what? Even though I agree with the Chachamim throughout the year, you should daven yourselves, but on Rosh Hashana Yom Kippur, you can rely on the Chazan. It didn't have Machzerim then, you can rely on the Chazan. And the Gemara explains, Man Chmoidim Rab Meir. Rab Meir is the one. This other Rabbi Yechanan was referring to Rab Meir. The halacha meklal debligi is Rabbanan. And the halacha that they're arguing, that's the Rabbanan of our Mishnah who argue across the board. Where is this Rab Meir? The time of the Brisa. Baruch Rosh Hashana Kippur Shlotiv Moitzir Amichos Rab Meir holds that Rosh Hashana Kippur is different than the rest of the year. We can rely on the chazan, but the rest of the year you have to daven yourself, and that's what Rabbi Yechon was referring to. Chachamim say no, that even Rosh Hashanah Kippur you have to daven yourself. Rameir makes a kind of a compromise, different Rosh Hashanah Kippur and the rest of the year. And Rabbi Yechon is saying that the halacha is like Rameir. The rest of the year, every individual should daven. Sorry, the rest of the year, I believe the halacha is Gamliel, because it's still every person technically can rely on the chazan. But Rosh Hashanah Kippur, even Rameir agrees to Rabbi Gamliel. I'm going to ask, why should a mayor make a distinction between Rosh Hashanah Kippur and the rest of the year? Ma'ishna Hani, why should Rosh Hashanah Kippur be different? That on Rosh Hashanah Kippur you can rely on the chazan and not the rest of the year. Because remember we have to say 10 psukim by Malchias and 10 by Zichron, 10 by Shofars, 3 of Torah, 3 Nevi'im, 3 Ksuvim, and then 1 from Torah, or a quarter of Yechid, but at least 3 psukim. Too many psukim. Who remembers them? If it's because of psukim, but Amar of Chananel, Amar Rav, then the Chananel say in the name of the Rav, Kivan Sha'amar, as soon as you say it's a Rosh Hashana Daf, as soon as you say your Torah, it's written the following: Shuv Ein Tzarich. As Rashi explains, we're talking about on Rosh Hashanah. In addition, there's also Kabbalah, the psukim of Musaf, Rosh Hashanah, Musaf Rosh Chodesh, and you don't remember them. As soon as you say that, you said Eivishter, I brought the kabbalas like you instructed us. Good enough. You don't have to spell them out. So therefore, on Rosh Hashanah Kippur, let the individual daven, and the part he doesn't remember, just say that pasuk. The reason is the brachas themselves are too long. There's 9 brachas. Normally you have 7, and now you have 9. Now, there's a big argument Rashi and Taisus here. When it says too many psukim, Rashi says the only psukim we're really talking about are the psukim of the karbanos, and there we say there's a shortcut. But when it comes to the other one, Malchi, Zichron, and Shofar, there's no shortcuts, because Rabbi Yechon Nuri, who is more lenient, says a minimum of 3 psukim. Nobody says no psukim. However, Taisus disagrees. He says exactly the opposite. Rabbi Tam says when it comes to the psukim about karbanos, you must say it. You must say there's no alternative. When it comes to the 10 psukim or the 3 psukim, they're saying if you're going to already say psukim, you have to say minimum of 3 or minimum of 10. But if we don't say any psukim, you just say it is good enough. And the Rosh says that he doesn't know what Rabbi Tam is talking about. There's no basis in the Gemara or anywhere that we need to include a davening psukim about musafim. It's only a custom that happened in times of Goyim and onwards. And therefore, Rashi might be right. Okay, let's see the Gemara. Let's analyze what we just said. As soon as you say you no longer have to say anything. We thought only if you're davening on your own, you could just say that's good enough. But it comes to a minyan, you have to spell out all of psukim. Doesn't matter if you're davening on your own or in a tzibur. As soon as you say, we don't have to say anymore. Okay. So bottom line is, why does Rameir say that Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur is different than the rest of the year? Because not so much of the psukim, is more because the davening is very long and we don't remember it. First, a person should prepare themselves their davening, and only afterwards should you daven. Rabbi says, when does this apply? It makes sense that Rabbi Lazar, the bracha Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, only once or twice a year. We should therefore prepare our davening before Yom Tov to look at it, make sure we know the davening. Or things which happen on occasion like Yom Tov. But today, because we have Siddur and everything else, it's very different. In those days when you had to say by heart, so you had to prepare. But the rest of the year, you don't have to prepare, even then, because you daven every day, so you remember. Saying about it's not so, but Rabbi Yehuda used to prepare his davening before he davened, even during the week. So we answer shiny Rabbi Yehuda. He was very different. You know why? Kivon the mitlosin yemin having matzli. He only davened once a month. Kiprokim dami. It's like only a rare event, and therefore he taka had to prepare. Now, why did he daven only once in 30 days? So we said in Mor Shabbos he was Terosei of Nosei, his whole life was Torah. But Rashi adds something here which the Meforshim ask. They don't know where Rashi got it from, but Rashi said that Yehuda used to revise the entire Shas every 30 days. We had that in the Gemara of Sheshes, used to learn the entire Shas every 30 days. Where he says of Yehuda, used to learn the entire Shas every 30 days, and therefore, so therefore he did, and he was so into the davening that he didn't, into the learning, that he didn't have to daven, because Torah was his vocation, Torah was his life. The only thing he had to interrupt his learning for was for Shema, for Krishma, but not for Shemon Esrei. So for him, it was only once a month, and therefore he didn't remember he had to prepare.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Don't we say about Rabbi Yehuda that Kula Tanoi ben Zikin Hava? So if so, he wasn't chazering the whole Shas, he was just chazering the Zikin.
No, but Raja says he went through the whole Shas.
He says, Machzit Talmudoi. What's his
but Tanui, true, Kol Shleishin Yem. But even though it says Tanui Zikin, he definitely learned the whole Shas. We have Machlekes and Rabbi Yehuda throughout the whole Shas. Rabbi Yehuda Ameir was not limited to what do you call it? Only to what do you call it? To the Zikin. But his koch, I guess, was where he really was ma'ayin a lot.
His field of expertise, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. When he said the chazan could be mitzvah everybody, it's not only the people in shul, but even people who were not in shul, out in the fields. Says the Gemara. So you're saying that it is not including people in shul? Adara, on the contrary. Hani anisi hananisi. On the contrary, dafka the people who are not in shul are not able to come to shul, so the chazan is mitzvah. But people are able to come to shul and they don't bother. Why would the chazan be mitzvah them? In fact, the Tani Abba Breda the people sha'achayri kainim are giving brichas kainim inside the shul. So obviously they bless everyone inside the shul, and even a mechitza partition of metal cannot obstruct the brachas. But if they're behind the kainim, they couldn't be bothered to walk into the shul. Ain't a bracha, they're not including the bracha. Anybody could have come in, they're not including the bracha. So the chayda, on the contrary, Gemula is saying people outside in the country, they're the ones who are included, but people who could have walked in the shul, they live right here and they didn't come in, why should they be included? Gemula did not exempt only only those who couldn't come to shul. My time because they couldn't make it. Either b'melacha, we're talking about the rest of the year, or on Rosh Hashana, on Yom Kippur, they just couldn't make it. But if they're in the city, they couldn't be bothered to come into the shul, then they're not included. They should come into the shul. But once they're in shul, if they don't know how to daven, of course the chazan can be mitzvah them. Or even they do know how to daven, the chazan is mitzvah everybody. They made an effort to come, according to Gamliel, is mitzvah everybody. But people who could have come into the shul and didn't bother coming to the shul, they are not included at all. So Hadnalach, Yom Tov, Uslikula, Masechta Rosh Hashana. So Malach everybody for completing Rosh Hashana, and tomorrow we start Masechta Tainus.